Giants. Okay. Okay. All right. Are we live? Okay. Shalom and welcome everyone to another Ask Me Anything monthly session with researcher, speaker, and author Gary Wayne. This is your host, Lisa George. We've received a bunch of questions during last month's show, and Gary will be answering these today. If you do have a question for Gary, please join the live chat here on YouTube and put it in all caps or capital letters so that we can see them. My niece, Rihanna, who's going to be in the chat, she'll be helping me again today, and she'll be retrieving questions so that we don't miss any. But it'll really help if you could put it in all capital letters so we can see it. Thank you, Rihanna, again, for helping out. Thanks to our awesome moderators, Tammy and Sherry, and for all your help today. And Brother Gary, I'd like to give you a chance to share your information. Let us know how you're doing today. How's the weather over there in Canada? Anything else you want to share?
Sure. So happy to be back and looking forward to the show tonight. And for people who want to get a hold of me, that's best way to do that is through the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, there's a contact the author. And if you don't remember the email address, just think of the actual website number. So it's genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. But if you just click on contact the author, it will come through to me. Either way is fine. And there's a generous excerpt of all 84 chapters of book 2, all 98 chapters of book 1. And there's an ability, if you want to support me, if you like what I say and you like what is being talked about in the generous excerpts, you can support me by going and buying a signed copy. So I have a buy now page, and I have 3 pages on that. Buy 1 is book 1, buy 2 is book 2, and there's multiple discounts for each if you buy more than one book, depending on how many you buy. And then the 3rd page is the bundling page, and that's where you can buy one of each or multiples of each, whichever you want to do, and get them custom signed to whomever that you want to get signed on, all different ways of buying that, and you get the discounts on the bundling as well that way. So you can also link over to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, amazon.ca from the website, and you can link over as well to get the digital format for the Kindle version on Amazon for both books, as well as the Audible version. And of course, on Amazon, it's got all 3 on the same advertisement page and buy page. So you're getting there in multiple ways, and it just takes you right to the page. So that's the best way to get a hold of me, and also probably the fastest, easiest way to buy a book, whether it is from me or from Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing all that, Gary. I also want to let everyone know Zen is going to be in the chat today. So if you'd like to say hi to him, he's in there as Endeavor Freedom. And he's getting so much better. As you heard his voice earlier, Gary, it's so much better. He's starting to do shows on other channels again. So our prayers are being answered. It's such a relief and so amazing that the Most High is healing him so well. I also wanted to ask you, Gary, we were thinking about you the last couple weeks because of information we learned in book 1 about David and Goliath, that they're relatives. I had no idea until I read your book. And there's a new series out on Amazon Prime called House of David. They use the biblical story, base of David and Goliath, but, they have some backstories in there that we've discovered on different midrashes, Jewish legend, give it kind of a background on David's mother, which we know nothing about, on Jesse and how his bloodlines sort of tainted the way the community looked at him because he was part Moabite, even though a small fraction. And especially a scene where we see Orpah declaring herself as mother of giants and presenting Goliath as her son. So I wanted to ask you, Gary, if you've heard of that series, and also if you've heard any information on David's mother.
Yeah, really good questions. So Yeah, and book one, I do follow some of those non-biblical sources, and I thought hard, do I want to put that into book one or not put it in there? And I thought, no, just in case, because, the way the enemies work is they like to bring stuff in and then surprise people. So if they can make any sort of connection of King David back to giants and sort of draft that into their belief system, I just thought it was important to show people where those stories come from, and that even though there is a cousin relationship between Goliath and David, they are of different parents. So it's just how the whole story sort of plays out in the time of Moab. So no, we don't get much information on David's mother. That's not unusual in the Bible, where we don't get much information on the mothers. But again, I think there's enough in it in terms of what I've laid out in book one that gives you all the information you need to keep things separated, and to say, okay, well, that could be true. And I don't have any doubt that large amounts of that is true, but it doesn't contradict anything in the Bible or dismiss the pure genealogy of David. So I also put a little bit of references to this into book two, but I left most of it for book one. As for the series, I saw a posting in the Gary Wayne and Genesis 6 conspiracy group, and I've not seen it yet. It looks like it's on YouTube. And from what I'm seeing on people commenting, they find it to be quite interesting and enjoyable. So I'm hoping to get a chance to review it and see how accurate that it is. But I'm for getting any information out there about parts of history that I think there should be more focus on. And that I'm hoping that series, and again, I know it's not all released yet, but as the story unfolds, it's going to show a greater relationship between Israel and the giants that are there, which is probably not going to be where I would like it to be, but I'm hoping that they'll shine a little bit more light on it.
Yeah, I agree too, Gary. I just thought it was so cool that, I didn't know that information. I would have never known until I'd read your book some years ago, and then to see it in film, and they do a great job in the film. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings style with a lot of battles. They actually do depict Goliath as a giant. Maybe not the 2-to-1 ratio with the width, but at least they have him pretty big. And we know from your work that there was a lot of giant action going on in that land, even after Joshua pretty much annihilated, most of the giant tribes, but they were still around. Like, I was just even thinking of, like, even was it the Gibeonites, the ones that served in the temple?
Yes, the Gibeonites, and probably from the Hivim tribe, as part of that alliance that was in central Israel. And yeah, I cover that off, hopefully in enough detail for people, because it's get asked a lot, whether or not giants have the ability to convert or not because of their DNA. And I'm always a firm belief, and I'll keep my hope here, even if it's ever proven wrong, but that all people have an ability to choose God or not. And this is an interesting case where you have temple servants that are brought in the time of Joshua, even though they deceived Joshua as to who they were. And God honors that authority that Joshua had, and so they bring them in as a bloodline of giants and hybrid giants within Israel, and working within the temple as it will come downstream. And so in the time of King Solomon, and in the time of the return from Judea after the Babylon diaspora, you're actually going to get that bloodline connected as the Nephilim, which is, and I think in book two, I take that back and show you how we know that these are from the Gibeonim, as I would now refer to them as, and or the Hivim. And I also have a document on that as well if people want to get a hold of me on that. So just all these interesting relationships. But what it shows is you wouldn't have them in the temple if they were there to degrade that holy ground and in that service. So they would have had to have been fully committed. And Also, amongst the mighty ones of David, which are all Israelites, you have a couple of notable hybrids and giants. So you have like Uriah the Hittite, for example, and you have a Makathim and a couple other suspects that would be likely from the bloodlines of the giants. And so they can be mercenaries, and David conscripted many mercenaries from the Philistine Confederacy as well, included the Cherethim and the Pelathim. So, and all of those are giants that came with the Philistines from Crete. So there's a lot more going on there. Now, I'm not suggesting a mercenary has converted, but I'm just laying that out to make the case that there were a lot of giants that were also working with the Israelites, some for money, but some for service.
Right, right. And then that also brings to mind Caleb and Caleb's Kenite bloodline. You cover that in your first book really well. So that one popped in my mind when you were saying the converted ones.
Yeah. So, and, Caleb's a real interesting one. And so it depends on how you derive that bloodline, whether or not he would be as an Edomite or it would be, directly from giants. So I think it's probably, bloodlines that are out of Edom, but not necessarily, pure giant bloodlines is where I kind of speculate on that. But I'm fine whichever way, because again, I think everybody has free choice. And Caleb actually means basically dog in Hebrew. And then as you start to get into that, you kind of wonder, well, the dog mythos has all of these giant-like beings were mercenaries. And so Caleb would be like a mercenary being brought in. And he rises to quite a high level. He's going to be the one who's going to be the head of Judah at the end of the conquest of the covenant land. And he's going to be the one that's going to drive initially out for the second time the three Anak kings in the Hebron or Kiryat Arba area of Sheshai, Talmai, and Ahiman. And so there's an interesting relationship that's going on there as well. So, yeah, just the details of the Bible is just so interesting. And I think we need to pay attention to to all of the details and try and figure out what's really going on.
Yes, that's true. And also, I believe I've read in Jewish legend that Caleb actually ended up marrying Moses' sister Miriam. Have you read that? I'm not sure.
No. Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not sure that that's the case. I've not actually read a lot of detail on that. But, Miriam dies before they even get into the covenant land. So that would suggest that the time where he would have married Miriam would be sometime in that period in the wilderness. That's possible. But we're not given any detail on that. And one would think that that would be a detail that we would have. Miriam was a very important individual at that period of time and a prophetess. So, yeah, I'm not convinced of that, but I'd have to see more detail on it.
Yeah, sounds great, Gary. Well, let's get into the questions. Sorry, I just wanted to address that real quick. Sorry, everybody in the chat. I just had to ask because we've been thinking about Gary's work as we're watching this series, and I believe that a new one just was released today, episode 4. So you got some catching up to do, Gary, if you're going to watch those. But I will go ahead and ask the first question that was submitted. And again, my niece, Rihanna, is in the chat. She is taking your questions. So I appreciate it if you could put those in all capital letters so that she can see those, retrieve them. And then if we make it through all the questions this time, because I think we have 7 or 8 questions that were submitted, we will go with the first in order of the questions that were submitted in chat today. And if not, they will be in our next Ask Me Anything, which is always the first Wednesday of every month. So we will be asking your questions in April. So make sure to tune into that show. So the first question that was submitted is by 3L Koyo. They're asking, who are the 2 witnesses and 2 candlesticks described in the book of Revelation?
That's a very, very good question. And when we look at the language there, it is not as clear as maybe one would like it, but I think there's a lot of things to sort of dig into just in those two passages. And so you could read that passage in one of two ways as well, which makes it kind of interesting. So you could read it as two olive trees and two candlesticks that are standing before God of the earth. And I would suggest that it's not two different types of groups of beings, and I will come back to that in a few minutes. Although you could look at it even from Zechariah 4, where I'll come back to. You could interpret that as being separate as well. But my gut feeling is they're really talking about the same individuals that are before God and of the earth, and that makes them very, very important beings. And that these beings are going to suffer the first death, it seems, as opposed to a second death, which typically isn't reserved for people of Israel if they're going to survive into eternity and or Christians. So Hebrews 9:27, talks about one death and then the judgment, but also an akin to, as it goes on in 9:7, that it's like Jesus's first death and then his return for salvation, right? So when we look at the one death, Jesus, when he takes a bodily form, it's one death in eternity, and for most humans, except for those who are going to be raptured, it's that way as well. So I would be narrowing these beings, if they're down to, as understood as human beings, to being ones who were preserved from the first death. Others will look at this as two angelic beings. So we'll look at that sort of as I talk a little bit more on that. But I just wanted to sort of get that kind of understanding on the table. So these are either very, very holy people or they're angelic-like beings. Those are the two options. And or are they both? Would be that third option as you enter into it. And they're protected by God, so that anybody who tries to hurt them, they're going to be devoured by fire. So, and it's going to come out of the mouths of these individuals. So again, you're going to have the power of an angel, or be as being authorized, or being an angel that would have the ability to do that. So again, depending on how you want to look at that, how you're going to understand that. So when we look at another relationship that's in here that we should sort of understand, it comes out of Revelation 1:20, where you have 7 candlesticks that are and 7 stars that are before the throne in Revelation 1:20, and the stars are angels, and the 7 candlesticks are the church. And this is a New Testament prophecy of the New Covenant versus the Old Covenant. And you could look at the 2 different covenants that have been grafted together, but there could be a relationship here with that Numbers 2. And that when we look at the setting that's going on there, there's also 7 lamps and 7 pipes that are above that, that are sitting, in the area of God's throne as well. So that sort of lines up very, very well with Revelation 1:20 as we look at these lamps, which are understood as probably oil lamps, and probably olive oil lamps that is being used to light those lamps. It could be a different oil, but one would suspect it might be from the olive tree. And so in Zechariah 4, you have these 2 olive branches, which is, the same language that's from the 2 olive trees. And you also have in Zechariah 14, you also have 2 anointed ones, and they're standing by the Lord, which is, again, is the same language, Lord of the earth. And that's Jehovah of the earth. And so again, as we look at who is the anointed one, that is going to be Jesus, the Word made flesh, the equivalent of Jehovah of the Elohim, the word logos of the God Theos of the New Testament. And we also get this reference of that olive tree that's in Romans 11 that we're grafted into. And so again, now are we talking about two different branches? Because these in Zechariah 4, they're talking about olive branches. So one could be of the northern tribe, one could be of the southern kingdom, or the northern kingdom, one of the southern kingdom, or we could be talking about the two covenants, or we're talking about both. So it gets kind of interesting as you get into the language of this, and that when we look at these branches, Shabal in Hebrew, it's flowing as in a stream from God. And that's really kind of interesting.
Wow.
And and we have these 7 pipes, which is the Hebrew words santera, which is lamps with oil. So there's a flowing of this oil, and associated with the olive tree was kind of how I sort of got there on that. And David looks at himself as a green olive tree, or that's talked about in Psalms 52:8. And so these two anointed ones and these 2 olive branches, are they talking about 2 different groups there, or are they the same? I kind of look at it as the same, but I can understand how people would say there's maybe 4 beings that we get there. But I think the imagery is sort of coming together. And so another passage I would have people look at, and this really goes to help, and I've named other passages when I do a reference to the fig tree and the vine, because this one really takes a larger explanation, kind of what we're talking about now when you get into it. But for people when they get a chance to read, Judges 9:8, where it's talking about 2 olive trees that are being asked for as kings to reign over all of Israel. And in there, the fig tree is mentioned as an allegory for the southern kingdom, and you have the vine, that's the allegory for the northern kingdom. So in this, it's referencing 2 kings, just as David is a king of all of Israel after he consolidates the empire. And he's the first king, and he refers himself as that olive tree. So again, you have all of this imagery when it comes to olives and fig trees, and there's way more passages than I can get into tonight, but I just want to lay down here that when I look at all of this information as it comes together, I'm looking at 2 individuals, and not 4 individuals. I think the candlestick and the olive tree is a reference to the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, or the 2 tribes, the 2 kingdoms. So I'm looking for individuals that would sort of represent that. Now, in the end time, David is around, and but he has already suffered the first death, but he's going to be leading with Jehovah of the Elohim, Jesus, the second Exodus, as it's talked through in Ezekiel 37. And I would also use Jeremiah 30 and 31 in the time of Jacob's trouble in the last 3.5 years when that second Exodus happens. There is also 7 shepherds that will be in working that Exodus, as the book of Micah talks about, for that second Exodus. And so, again, we could have a relationship there from the Old Testament of 7 shepherds and the 7 churches, as the candlesticks are talking about. And we also have the 7 likely archangels that are looking after the church as well. So now then, when we look at the understanding of these 2 beings that are killed, I would look at ones that would best represent the testimony that they're going to provide as being eyewitnesses. So Elijah could be there, but he's likely fitting more because he's taken into heaven, as we're told in the Old Testament. But he is also in the book of Malachi said to make the way for Jesus. And so is that part of the second Exodus? Does he come just before that and does some things? And he's not being killed in the last 3.5 years. So I don't see him as being part of the two witnesses, but I'm open to it. I just struggle with how those details work because of being killed. And so I would look at two other ones that might fit there. So you would have Enoch, and you would have the disciple Jesus loved. That's talked about at the end of book of John, that Jesus basically is saying to them, what is it to you if I want him to live until I return? So I think we have three candidates. And I wouldn't rule Moses in there because, again, he's also has suffered the first death. I mean, you can make a good argument that he would be there, but we don't get a passage anywhere that anybody suffers a second death, other than it's that permanent second death, after the judgment. So I kind of leave that one out as well. Now, he's already in heaven. I mean, obviously in the Transfiguration, he's being shown as is Elijah. So you can make a good case that it would be Elijah and Moses, but it's just the other detail in there about the death and the suffering of the first death that I would look at two individuals like the disciple. I would lean towards the disciple that Jesus loved, and I would lean to Enoch. But I'm open to anybody representing the old covenant as well as being in there. I just don't seem to have that as a witness. And as a member of the Jewish people, I mean, not only would the disciple that Jesus loved be able to testify to everything that Jesus did, but also as a Jewish person to what they believed and to the Old Testament. So it's a good possibility, but I don't like to get nailed down on it because we're not told who their names are, and that's done for a reason. And I don't know what the reason is, but it's for a reason.
Right. And I remember reading also in your first book, Gary, about that disciple who Jesus loved, that I think you were saying that it could be Nathaniel instead of John.
Yeah, and he's the one that Jesus found under the tree, right?
Yes.
And obviously had great admiration for this individual. And when you look at disciples that are being named, he's not really named as part of the major disciples, but yet he's part of that whole movement. So I think that might be a good indication it might be him. Now, other people will say, well, you could be Lazarus, who is the person that Jesus actually cried for, and it was specifically said that he loved him. And I don't disagree with that as well. And who knows, he may be around to the end time with the quickening spirit and whatever else was given to him. And he already suffered the first death. So one would suspect he's either still alive or he was taken in that new body form into heaven. But we don't have scripture for that either. So so that's one of my stumbling blocks of using Lazarus, is that he was raised from the dead. So
very interesting.
So it's just one thing. It's and I've talked about this on lots of shows, and there's lots of good arguments for so many individuals, including angelic beings, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I've actually heard some other different scenarios and different candidates for these two witnesses, but I really appreciate you always back it up with your research. And sorry to go on that tangent about the disciple that Jesus loved, but I'd never heard that before until I read your book. So I thought that was a interesting connection also. We can go on to the next question. Oh, did you have anything else, Gary?
Well, I was just going to say on that is when it's just that, it's the one who comes up out of the abyss that's going to kill them. It's not like they're going to just trample on them. They're actually going to kill them. And then we're actually shown them resurrecting to heaven in the language that's used in Revelation 11. That seems to be a totally human thing, right?
Yeah. So that is very interesting. Okay, let's get on to the next question. This is from Mark Stump. He is asking, do the Philistines come from the sea? And this is another topic that is sort of addressed. It doesn't answer this question, but sort of addressed in that series, House of David. So make sure that you take a look at that, Gary. I'm interested to hear your take on the episodes so far. And then this question: do the Philistines come from the sea?
Yeah, so the simple answer is yes, but in a direct route through coming with the Philistines, who originally show up in the Covenant land, then they moved to Egypt, and then they moved to Crete. And then they're going to intermarry with giants that are there, and the Philistines are going to be classified as a hybrid human giant tribe at this point, from intermarrying with different giants, as migrating back to the Covenant land to expropriate the land area of Gaza and set up their 5-city pentapolis in the Gaza region. And so they're going to keep Avim and Anakim with them, but it's the Avim that would be the most appropriate understanding as we trace this sort of back. So in Deuteronomy 2:23, we have the Casualhim being discussed, and it is the Casualhim in combination with Genesis 10:14, where you have them as the progenitors of the Caphtorim, and the Caphtorim replaced the Avim. So the Casualhim and the Caphtorim the Philistines and the Caphtorim come from the Casualhim in two separate sort of branches as they become united on the island of Crete. So when we look at the Caphtorim, they replace the Avim and the Philistines together in that land, and they also accepted in a number of Anakim as well. But the Caphtorim and the Philistines and the Casualhim and the Cherithim and the Pelathim, they all come from the island of Crete. So when we look at that word Caphtor, as you take that back to the Hebrew, it means a wreath-shaped island that's defined as Crete.
Wow.
And yeah, so Caphtor, you would take that back to the original Semitic or Hebrew would be KTR. And so that's where you have a god that is connected in there as well, as to who is the god of that island, and leaves a gens in there as well. But this is Karet, which is the Ben El of the Baalim in the Ugaritic text. And that's the source word for the word Crete. And so Caphtor H3732 means Crete, just to sort of underline that. So the sea peoples are not just the Cretans, but they're all the ones that of the descendants of Japheth that migrated around the Mediterranean and were on islands and on seacoasts. But the people of Crete, we might better recognize those as the Minoan Empire. That's who this confederacy is. And this is the confederacy that I think in the time of the Santorini explosions in about 1550 or before, are going to be forced to migrate, and they're going to migrate to the Gaza region because they need to go find somewhere to live. And they are very militaristic sort of beings. And where you have earlier sort of things of descriptions of Philistines, they would be more like the Anakim. These descriptions of these people coming back is distinctly as in a Greek look in all aspects, including the uniforms and skin color and hair color. So, yeah, so the Philistines are by evolution become sea people, but originally they would have been going to Egypt and then up to Crete afterwards. And I follow that migration in book 2 for people.
Great. Thank you, Gary. And I remember you saying, I think it was on a previous Ask Me Anything, one of the questions were what the look of the giants that were descended from the seraphim versus the cherubim. And from what I remember, you said something about the darker haired ones would have been more likely to descend from fallen cherubim angels, whereas the reptilian type of serpent-looking ones were more likely from the seraphim. And so the Philistines would be more cherubim. Is that correct?
Well, as they intermarried and took on those traits, yes, they'd be more the dark-haired ones. But originally, they wouldn't have had that overwhelming sort of cherubim type of look. So, and we know the Philistines come out of the Hamites, right? We get the genealogy there. So it's this transition into hybrids and intermarrying amongst all of these other giant tribes like the Casluhim, the Caphtorim, the Pelathim, the Cherathim, where they're going to, get those features from. So when we look at the cherubim, and we look at a connection that's in the Sumerian reliefs, where we have these rituals around this technological tree-like thing that some people describe as a tree of life. You have depictions of these bearded, dark-haired angels with wings doing this ritual with this, this pine cone or crystal or purse or bag that's probably got some technology or something in there or something, for magic spells or whatever they're going to use in that ritual. But you also have identical reliefs that will have it with a bird face. Well, what's the angel that has a bird face and a human face? Well, the cherubim are four-faced ones, right? So they have a bull, a lion, a bird, and a human. So if they took one of those forms, then I think that when we now overlay that look of the cherubim, and from the human-faced one to produce ones that would just look just like them. And we overlay the depictions of Gilgamesh and Nimrod, who would have intermarried amongst those Eastern Sumerian, Anunnaki, cherubim gods and giants, that they're depicted the same way. And the Syrian kings are depicted the same way. So the dark-haired Greek kings and giants are depicted the same way. So distinct from the red hair and the blonde hair from the seraphim and the blonde, blue eyes and hazel or red eyes or green eyes, and these ones would have had pale skin and dark eyes. So a completely different look, and also depicted as being a little bit taller, just as Orontes and Gilgamesh are both depicted at 19 feet tall, which is quite a bit larger from the post-Diluvian giants than the largest accountings that we get with King Og, that you could probably get him to 14 feet, maybe 15 feet tall based on his bed size. But typically the average size of giant, even in Greek accountings like Achilles and giants like that, they're about 12 feet tall. So these ones are a little bit more distinct. So yeah, I think they're from that cherubim watcher variety if they produced giants, and I think it's likely that they did. We also get bird-faced warriors and giants all throughout Southeast Asia called the Tengu. Wow. And if you Google that, Tengu, you see these bird-faced priests and warriors, right? And the Zabalba in the Popol Vuh were owl-faced giants, and they had a special. And these are demigods as well, as they're listed in the Popol Vuh for the Quiché Maya, and the House of Camazotz, which means the House of the Bat. And of course, if you Google Camazotz, you get the outfit that Batman wears, basically.
Oh my goodness. They just depict everything in plain sight in the media, don't they? Thank you so much for that amazing answer, Gary. Yeah, and it's just up to us to do our research. I feel like a detective half the time here when I'm doing research, because what's not in the Bible helps to explain the Bible usually. And so you go out to the outside resources, gather as many as you can, at least 2 or 3 witnesses, and then try to make sense of what's going on in the Bible. And of course, with your help, Gary, you did such a great job connecting so many dots for me anyway. And I'm sure everyone else here in the chat is really appreciative of your information, Gary. We're going to go on to the next question. This is from one of our moderators. I want to thank you guys. Thank you so much, Brick and Sharon in the chat, for doing such a great job moderating and being so welcoming, and to Rihanna, who's my niece, who's continuing to take the questions. But Brick has a question, one of our moderators. He's asking, What is the birthplace of fairies and dwarves?
Yeah, very, very, very good question. And what's interesting about fairies and dwarves and the group of beings that they belong with, is that this tradition shows up both before and after the flood, and on all continents and all cultures around the world, including North America. And they're the same groups that are separated, the little ones as we understand them for the most part, and then a larger group called the salamanders, or a reptilian group, that were also creations from the gods. So when we look at this sort of worldwide dispersions of the fairies and the dwarves, they are a Nephilim-like being, but something that's, again, distinct, because of their size, and they have different powers and gifts and things like that, and that these are called elementals. And so anytime I'm looking to talk about something that's within the occult visible hierarchy, and also as a demonic spirit part of the invisible hierarchy, and we're talking about these groups of beings that's very common throughout polytheism, I want to make sure we can take it back to the Bible, that there's some sort of basis on. And I wanted to be sure of that before I put these little people and talked about them in book 1. And so when we look at the elementals, as they're called, that term actually shows up in the Bible in Galatians 4, 3, and 9. And those elementals are ones that are enslaving us in the physical world. And elementals can also be translated from its Greek word stoichian as a basic element of the world, and it's quite obvious when it's being used in that application, but inanimate objects can't enslave us. And the other thing that's going on in both of the areas where elementals are going to show up in the New Testament is there's this association with angels and fallen angels. So there's a direct connection there as well. And it's stoichian is translated as rudiment in Colossians 2, 8, and 20. And it's, again, talking about these beings that are enslaving us in this world. So just to lay that down, so these are subterranean nature beings as well. So for the most part, on the generic, there might be the odd exception because there's so many different kinds in the 3 different groups of the little ones. And so, but as generically speaking, these are subterranean beings or in the earth and dealing with nature and nature gods. So when we start to look at where's their birthplace, I think we get accounts from all over the world that we have gods that are producing these beings. So there's either one creation or multiple creations and in multiple locations. And so in the Cabal and Kabbalism, they're understood as the middle race and the Shadim, and that includes gnomes and sylphs and beings like that. So ones that are grouped within the elemental groupings of the occult. But also, I mean, Kabbalism is Jewish mysticism, so it could be an influence from there. But I'm just showing some of the connections that's taking everything back in this direction at this point. So you have them procreated for the most part by female gods or goddesses. So like Diana is the queen of the fairies in the Roman pantheon. And Pan is also associated with these as producing them as well. So again, even though most are produced from female goddesses, you still have some gods that are part of the mix as well. But we have these female goddesses that are known as fairy queens, right? So when you're looking at other goddesses that would be associated with creating fairies, it would be Danu of the Tuatha De Danann, which is thought to be the same as Diana. Freya of the Norse pantheon is associated with this as well. And these are what would be known as the fairy queens, or the queen of heavens, right? As
Wow.
all the different heads of the pantheon goddesses are created. And then we also get female goddesses like Tiamat that create all sorts of different creatures in the Sumerian pantheon, and Bast in the Egyptian pantheon. So we get a heavy dosage of female goddesses creating these lower level beings, and even in the physical order, because Nephilim would be higher than the elementals. And also in Norse, you have or in the Greek, I mean, you have with the nymphs and the Nereids, you have the old man of the sea, where Nereids would derive from Neros as a god, and a god of the sea, but that would typically be Iapetus and Poseidon as the parent god and the offspring god, both before and after the flood, who were creating some of these other beings. And that Nereus and Doris was the goddess that was used to produce these, or Doris is a human female that's mixed in with this. So it has been created to almost a goddess type level. And when we take the mermaids back, it goes back into this sort of category of the nymphs being associated with the female fairies of the sea as nymphs. There's a different sort of classification of them as the mermaids, although there's lots of other traditions where they come back from or are created from as these demonic beings, like, say, the sirens, which mermaids are equated with, and also the sirens that were the mothers of the original Nephilim before the flood, and would have been mothers of the giants after the flood as well, who died in their childbirth. And this seems to be some sort of reward for those beings to live in the occult world, so to speak. So I know I've been going on a lot, but I wanted people to know that this is a large piece of our history, both before and after the flood. And there seems to be a connection that the Bible is trying to make us aware of. So the birthplace, I think they were born all over the world, and you have different civilizations. You have the same pantheon, so probably from the same gods and mother goddesses who just have different vernacular names in those pantheons were creating in those locations as well.
Right, Gary, that just brings to mind here in Hawaii, we have our own legends of different giants, different entities. One of them is one of these small,
Menuhay.
I'm sorry, the Menehune.
The Menuhay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Menehune, yes, that's the small ones. And actually, one of my friends had an encounter with these. I was actually closer to his mother than to him, but his mother was telling the story of when he was a baby and in a crib. She said that she woke up to this noise and she actually saw these Menehunes parading into his room carrying lights, and she just stood there and watched. And they surrounded his crib, and then they stayed there for a little while, and then she made a noise, an accident, and they all took off. And then later on in his life, when he's older than I am now, and he's always been tormented by demonic entities. And she never could understand why until I made that connection for her of the Menehune, who for some reason decided to surround his crib, and then he actually ended up being in a psychiatric ward right now. So it's like it's amazing, that connection.
So with the Menuhay, and I always butcher that pronunciation, but I'm not from Hawaii.
Like it's okay. You're doing good. You're doing good.
You have, these are part of the mischievous group. So leprechauns are in that grouping, pixies, brownies, Menuhay, and imps, for example. So, and there's more, but those would be sort of the main ones that people would know. The good-looking ones, which are the little people, as they're understood as, they would have like Nereids, that I talked about, sprites, mermaids, nymphs, light elves, or sylphs. They should be probably a better expression of that, because generally a white elf is a giant versus the dark elves. So I would put this as more as the dark elves. But dark elves can also be classified as ugly ones. So there's a bit of a mix on that. The laurel people are the are the ones in the First Nations of North America that they would put the mischievous group in for the most part. There's a few different combinations. And for First Nations, on the good-looking ones, that's generally the dogwood group. And then the ugly ones are like gnomes and dark elves and trolls and hobbits and goblins and dwarves.
Yeah,
and
they are
these are
pretty
the
ugly. I agree.
and these are the rock people. So in terms of First Nations accounting of them on a generic basis.
Yeah, I'm remembering how Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit portrays like the trolls and those different groups. They're really not the most attractive compared to like the fairies, the elvins. It's huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're getting very close to break. We have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask a question. I think you can answer pretty quick, but you don't have to finish now. We can always continue after break if you don't get to all the details. This is from Michelle Weeks. She's asking, what are your thoughts about the Noahide laws being implemented?
Well, I'm not necessarily against it. It's just that it sort of violates the new covenant and the laws set down with the authority of James that limits those Noahide laws. So the Noah laws are the ones that are said were given to Adam and then passed on to Noah. And it comes out of that tradition because we don't get that biblically. We get the building of those principles, and the Noahide laws, as in the pure form, there's not an issue there. But it comes back in the Babylon tradition of the Talmud and Kabbalism entering into Jewish mysticism. So, I mean, what are they? Worshipping idols. Well, we shouldn't worship idols. Blaspheming God, we shouldn't do that. Murder, well, we shouldn't do that. Adultery, well, we shouldn't do that, or sexual behavior. And, we shouldn't be eating food. And again, that's in the laws of foods that are sacrificed in rituals and things like that. So I really don't, and theft is another one that's in there. So these are kind of most of, the 10 commandments. It's not quite all listed in that same sort of category. But I think there's going to be a usurping of this and a conversion over to the asceticism of the diet that's going to be imposed, that's beyond what was given to us by James. And I think it's going to be a perversion of the Assyrian Noahide laws as well. And things will change with that perversion if that happens, just as a Jubilees is no longer 50 years. It's more like 25 years, just as it is in the occult. And there's different laws with different nuances that comes out of like the laws of Hammurabi, for example. So we want to be careful with getting sucked into that. But if we have the Spirit in us, then we're led to fulfill the laws and the covenants of the Old Testament. So we should be wanting to fulfill that anyways. But it's that oppression that would come along with imposing that on us. And Paul was very, very clear on do not get mixed in with that cult who lays on these ascetic food laws and those who worship fallen angels. And he was referring to the Essenes, I think.
All right.
So we want to be careful with it.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Gary. We're at break, guys. So we'll see you in a few minutes.
Freedom Source.
Further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
Become even more involved? Please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
When Justin and I found out we were having a little girl, we named her Eliana and started dreaming of what life would be like with her, where we would take her, what we would teach her, and of course, what we would read to her. One day we walked around a bookstore looking for books we might want for her and found nothing. So we started brainstorming what exactly we would want. Even from a young age, we wanted her to know and understand the heart of God and hidden truths that are in ancient biblical manuscripts like the Book of Enoch, and the idea of the Prophecy for Children series was born. Justin got hard to work, and praise Yah released the Prophecy for Children series. We are grateful for the support and amazing feedback from others who have been wanting the same for their children. With our newest addition to the family, Ezra, we also added Enoch's Judgment of the Giants to this prophecy series. We're excited to keep writing books for our children to share with our truth-seeking family. To order these books today, please check out sacredwordpublishing.com/collections/children's-store.
Revolution Radio. Let's show them what we got. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
All right. Shalom and welcome everybody again who's just joining us after our break here. This is Lisa George, your host. I'm here with Gary Wayne, who's an excellent author, researcher, presenter, public speaker. If you haven't checked into his books, he's got two amazing ones that he's published in the past several years. The first one is the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and the second one is Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. They're both packed with information. They're both super long and just full of good stuff. If you want to go down a whole bunch of rabbit holes that have to do with the Bible, these are the places to start. Also, too, I just wanted to reintroduce Gary and see if you had anything else you wanted to share, Gary, before we get back into the questions. Are you there, brother, Gary?
Yep. No, we're
right.
good. I think we should get right into the questions. But just before I do that, just to polish off on the last one is the reason why I was sort of, underlining we want to be careful with the Noahide laws is that I do expect the Babylon religion is going to reinstate that, and they're going to use a combination of Noahide laws and other dietary laws and things that are going to be part of the mix. And that's how I think we get a perversion of the Noahide laws, as they would go back to Noah. I also know, and I've seen some other versions of the Noahide ones that are already perverted. So you want to be careful, and you want to know what they are. And but do be careful that we don't get into those situations where you're not going to be saved, as it'll be taught, if you're not eating from these dietary laws or following whatever rules and regulations that they want you to do.
Yes, I totally agree, Gary. It's important to know your enemy so that you know what weapons you need to use against the spiritual armor you need to put on and use against the enemy. I also wanted to address, too, thank you so much, Gary, for your book. I'm still continuing to read. I'm actually in the chapter called The Tribulation of the Saints, and I just wanted to touch on one thing in the previous chapter. Again, this is chapter 78. I'm in Gary's book, and it's just been such an amazing read so far. I'm taking it so slow so I can just absorb everything. You mentioned earlier something about the white horse symbology and what that will entail. And I just wanted to comment that there's been so much white horse symbology seen in the media just in the past 10 years or so. And also, I'm sure you've seen that the horse at Denver International Airport with the glowing red eyes. I've actually driven past the thing several times in trips to Colorado, and it is pretty creepy. Also, too, the white horse symbology has been seen. I noticed politicians and social media influencers have been wearing the polo shirt that has a white horse. Like Trump was wearing one, Biden was wearing one. It seems like they're trying to get people used to seeing that white horse symbology. And, we always know, they always try to show what they're doing in plain sight. So I think that they're trying to push somewhat of an ushering in, as you've talked about, Gary, how they're trying to create the situation to usher in their leader.
Yeah, and they're going to use scripture in a reimagined way, which they've been preparing us for, to bring the credibility of their Antichrist figures about. So, yeah, I think it's really important. And understand that those 4 horsemen, they're not, and riders, they're not demons as they've been classified as. They come from the presence of God. These are the four spirits that come from the presence of God in Zechariah 6, which I think is a terrific parallel and gives you some of the context you need for Revelation 6. So we want to be able to discern what's going on in the end time, but it begins with understanding what's written in the Bible and not what people tell you what's written in the Bible. You have to read for yourself, and you have to learn about these things, because they're going to reimagine, reinvent everything, and they're going to use an allegorical approach that they can twist any way that they want. So all of those things are red flags. And the white horse and the rider on it, who has a bow. Bow doesn't mean a weapon there. It means a very simple fabric. So,
yeah,
and it's the same fabric that the Caesars would wear, and or gowns of the gods, right? So it's a white gown, a very simple fabric. So we want to be careful of that.
Yes, it's good to keep our eyes open for those of us who have eyes to see. Let's go to the next question. This is from Rudy Fernandez. Who are the 7 archangels?
Yeah, so it's a bit of an open-ended question. So we're not told in the Bible there are 7 archangels, although one could infer that the 7 would include, let's say, the archangels associated with the trumpets. So we have 7 trumpets, 7 angels, and you might even infer that they might even be the same angels or other archangels that are included for the seal openings and for the wrath bowls. So, but certainly archangels are associated with the time of the rapture and the blowing of the trumpet that Jesus is talking about as well. So lots of different sort of connections there. And that's the number 7 that we have that we could associate it with. And archangels are a watcher angel, and they're from the throne of God. But we only get 2 archangels in the Bible,
Right.
proper, and that's Michael and Gabriel. So that's the only 2 we can use with certainty. And then we have, out of the Apocrypha of the old KJV, we have Uriel and Raphael. So that's 4. So then who are the other 3, if there are 7? And I think there is. I would certainly lean very strongly that they are. But to do so, we have to sort of bring in the Book of Enoch to get there.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, Michael and Gabriel are listed there, as are Uriel and Raphael, and also Regiel and Remiel.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the 7 angels that would be associated as those 7 holy ones. And what's also interesting about the Book of Enoch, it narrows this list down, but there's a different angel in this narrowing down. So now you get these 4 presences that are in the Book of Enoch. And then, Michael and Gabriel are part of that.
Yes.
But there's these 4 presences, but one of the angels that's listed isn't listed in the 7th, and that's Phanuel. So he's either going to be, one of the other angels as another name, or this is yet another very important archangel because he's of the 4 presences. And I kind of postulate that I think it's these 4 presences or these 4 spirits that are the head of the 4 sides of God in the throne assembly, over the different hierarchies that surround the throne of God. So I think when we look at who these 4 spirits are, we get these 4 spirits that come from the throne of God also in Zechariah 6 with the chariots, the 4 chariots. And just as we have these 4 riders in Revelation 6 that comes from the throne of God. And it's interesting, the pronouns that are used, that are going to go back to autos is basically understood as a reflecting pronoun, but also the meaning is as in a wind, right? And a baffling wind, just as ruach is the word for spirit in the Old Testament, and also is used as wind. So and then we also have the 4 winds of prophecy that show up, especially as they're bringing up the beast empires in the book of Daniel, and as they're used in terms of the dispersion of the tribes of Israel and bringing them back in the end time. So could be those 4 presences, but again, what doesn't fit is we have this extra angel that's in there, Phanuel, that's part of the 4, but isn't part of the 7. So that's the thing that you kind of look at, and that's one of the reasons why it's part of the Apocrypha. It's got a couple, things that are hanging out there that is a little bit hard to completely link up. Now, I like the Book of Enoch a lot, but we don't have a complete Hebrew manuscript for it, so we can't take, all of it back and test its veracity. But I would say that that's pretty close to the 7, and whether Phanuel is actually part of the 7 and which one, I don't know, but I'd say that's probably pretty close to the 7 archangel names.
Yeah, it's interesting how many other books that they're mentioned in outside of the Bible. It feels like there's so much information about these angels outside the Bible, like, the Apocalypse of Abraham, the book of Tobit describes Raphael. I mean, just like so much information. And the Bible is like, where are they? That's what I always feel like. Okay, thank you for that answer, Gary. Next question is from Tammy Hall. Are female pastors biblical?
I would say yes, and not in the sort of traditional sort of sense that we have a direct line on that today. But I think we can take a pattern in the Bible and extend that to a certain degree. And I know you really want to be careful of this, but there might be a level that you might consider, at least in this physical world, that the females wouldn't go beyond. And, one of the areas of there was in, like into certain parts of the temple, right? So, and particularly as you get closer to the Holy of Holies. But That doesn't mean they can't be teachers and they can't be, people that are working within the church and within the original temple. So what's the pattern that we might want to look at? Well, if you're not minister-like, if I can put it that way, or rabbi-like, are you really going to be a prophet? Probably not, because God would choose these prophets, and they're going to be, considered, part of the first fruits. They are, rewarded with extraordinary responsibility, extraordinary trial, and they're representing the word of God that's going to be kept down through the records throughout history. So these are very important individuals. So, Miriam is a prophetess, and she's called that in Exodus 15:20. And, a very important part of the leadership of Moses as they're coming out of the Exodus. So very important role in the formation of the Judaic hierarchy, religion, and organizational structure. The next one we have is Deborah, who was a judge. Well, typically the judges are people completely after the heart of God. And one would expect that, Deborah had, overlays into how scripture and the Holy Covenant was being applied as being the leader of Israel at that time. We have another female prophetess in 2 Kings 22, Hilda. We have Noadiah in Nehemiah. And we have an unnamed female prophet in Isaiah 8:3. So we have those examples. And from a New Testament perspective, we have Anna, who's a prophetess in Luke 2:36-38. So I think women are fine to be pastors, and it is biblical. I don't think there's restrictions on teaching the word of God. Now, when you get into the nation of priests, and in certain aspects of that, there's that sort of filtering down to that sort of narrow access. But I would say female pastors are completely biblical, based on what I said.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that answer, Gary. Let's go to the next question. This is from Michelle. This sounds like a yes or no question, but I'm not sure if you want to add. I'm sure maybe you could add some things onto this, Gary, with the answer. She's asking, does the Bible have tens of thousands of cross-references?
Well, the answer is yes and more.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's the most preternatural book ever written. And so it's going to have things that people will say with all these different authors or people being given the word of God. It could not have these many connections unless it was completely preternatural. So there's a person that has put together some images that they did on how many cross-references that I think is typically understood in the footnotes, like say of the KJV Bible and things like that, of 63,779. And those are our sort of annotated cross-references that are in the margins. But when you want to look at cross-references that the Bible actually has in terms of different narratives that go through the Bible, how many passages are referencing other ones that may not be listed in those margins, and there would be a lot. And all the different types of narratives that overlay and mix and rely on previous passages, I don't know how you'd count them all. It'd be way more than 63,000. I mean, you're probably in the millions and millions of references, as there's just so many, as they reference one, line into so many other lines, one word into so many words. There's like in Hebrew and Greek, the original meanings have, a wider understanding than some of the limited versions that we have as they're translated into English. And there's over 783,000 words in the KJV Bible. So, you just get into math that is beyond my capability. But so the simple answer is yes and no. Know that there would be way more, probably more than we can count.
Yeah, one of the things I think is interesting about a particular book in the Bible that references other books, but no other books in the Bible reference this particular book. Are you aware of this one, Gary? And this is not a trick question, but
I am not.
okay. It's the book of Esther. The book of
Yep.
Esther is not referenced by any other book in the Bible, but it, of course, references other books within it. So I just think that's kind of
Yes.
interesting. And it's also the only book not included in the Dead Sea Scroll collection. So it makes me wonder, okay,
Interesting.
where did this book come from? It's
Yeah.
also there's also no reference in anywhere in Persian history of there being a Hebrew
Yep.
queen or Jewish queen. So makes me
Yep.
ask a lot of questions, to say the least. All right, the last
Yeah.
question we have here from last time. I know I don't want to go any further with that just because it's the facts are there, but I could speculate as to why it's not in there, but I won't do that today. Just a kind of interesting note there. The last question from the last time is from myself, and then it looks like we'll probably have extra time, so I've taken down several questions that were asked at the very beginning of this study today to ask after my question. This is from Genesis chapter 36, verse 40 to 43, where Timnah, this is the mother of the Edomite dukes, and Oholibama, a wife of Esau, considered chiefs of Edom as women. That's the first part of this question. The next part is, was or is this a common practice among Edomites, Romans, and royals for women to rule, like the Amazons? And then in your opinion, Gary, were these rulers gender fluid in appearance?
Yeah, I would rule out not gender fluid in appearance. We don't really have anything on that. But what's interesting about Aholibama and Timnah, they're actually named as dukes of Edom in Genesis 36, 41, and 39. And we know these are both females, and they're dukes. The one that I wouldn't list would be Anna, because I'm not sure I agree with the translation where we have Aholibama as the daughter of Anna, daughter of Zibeon. We know Anna is one of the sons of Seir, as he's listed in 36:20 and 36:25. You could translate that word daughter as several different ways, as in like a daughter-in-law, for example, a woman, and also a granddaughter. And so some of the English translations don't say daughter of Zibeon. It would be just granddaughter of Zibeon. So who Aholibama is. So I think that's a poor translation there, and the rest of the passage is consistent that Anna would be a male there, who's one of the sons of Seir, including you have Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, and Anna. So I would look at that as being accurate, though, with Aholibama and Timnah being called a duke. And that is not usual biblically,
Right.
but understood why it should be there is important from understanding what's going on in the Old Testament, and also gives us an idea into the polytheist world as well. So Genesis 36 is outside the table of nations in First Chronicles and Genesis 10. And it's there for a reason, so that we can better understand the details that I was just talking about. And these are the dukes, or the Elaphim, or the fairy kings and queens that the polytheist side revels in. And these dukes of Edom are the 12 counterfeit tribes that they like to raise up to replace the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yes.
Right. So now if we get into Timnah and Eliphaz, who produce Amalek, Eliphaz is, you would think that would be the name of the tribe. But it's really coming up under Timnah. Now, what's interesting about this relationship here is the Amalekites are the people that are going to attack Israel when they come out of Egypt to wipe them from the face of the earth. Why? Because they would claim the rights to the Messianic promise. They would claim the rights to the inheritance and rights to the blessing that Jacob took from Esau, Eliphaz's father. And so the name Amalek is a group of hybrids because Timnah is the daughter of Seir.
Seir, yes.
Right? So as we work this back, so you've got a human and you've got a purebred female giant who's creating a tribe named Amalekites. And they're different than the Amalekim giants that show up in Genesis 14, but they're going to go and move these hybrids with Eliphaz and Timnah. They're going to move to the Seir region and live amongst the giants. So they're going to take the name of the giants and they're starting a new dynasty.
Yes.
Of Edomites. It's a brand new dynasty. And in polytheism, when you are going to start a new dynasty, you need to take a pure blood matriarchal fairy queen and understand Duke is the word that the occultists will adapt into the elven bloodline, the fairy bloodline from Eliphaz, and from Dukes, which is Aleph and Elephim for the plural, and the Catholic Encyclopedia in the Vatican refers to these hybrid races as the Elephim. So very interesting for the term that they're using for Duke there. But the important thing is this was a standard thing in polytheism, and now we have this hybrid race that's being created to try and take the blessings, birthright, and Messianic promise from the Israelites that are being created because it's a new dynasty. So now when we look at Aholibama marries Esau, and Aholibama is the daughter of Anna, son of Zibeon. Or you could read that as well as Anna had a daughter who's the son of Zibeon, who...
Oh.
Right? You could work it both ways, right? So, but anyways, she is a pure blood fairy queen as well. And so this is going to be the matriarchal branch line of two lines that are also going to intermarry into the Horim. And these are Hivim and Horim, and they're different branches of the same tribe. Just as Zibeon is called a Horim and a Hivim in Genesis 36. And they're going to intermarry with the Kassite dynasty of Syria and Mesopotamia, and the Horim dynasties there. Oh, wow. And it's going to also be an intermix into the Hurim, as we would understand them from a Hebrew perspective, Hurrians as they're understood in the secular version, and the Mitanni dynasties. These are going to be the 12 that are marrying and grafting all of those fairy bloodlines into Nephilim bloodlines, into greater scion grafting of genealogies that is going to come downstream and end up being bloodlines of the European monarchs that migrate out of the Middle East. So this is a standard thing in the occult, and I think it's there to help us understand that, females were rare in the Bible, but they're named two females there. And that this is how new dynasties are created, and part of the pattern of how the Rephaim giants after the flood, who are having not enough females, are going to go extinct unless they intermarry with humans, unless they do go extinct. So that's where you start to get this evolution into smaller types of giants, and then less features of the giants. And the more they have to bring in human bloodline to keep the bloodlines free of diseases, the more human traits they take on.
Wow. Okay, so that's the reason they bring in the human bloodlines to keep their... But can you repeat what you just said? I never heard that before. To keep them free from diseases, the Nephilim bloodlines?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you get hemophiliac disease, that's a bloodline genetic disease. If you get, and the classic one for the understanding is the Habsburg jaw.
Yes.
And so they self-impose in the royales, 4 generations have to be apart to keep these diseases out. And so it's from too much intermarriage. And they try and intermarriage as much as they can to keep the purity, because that's where they feel they get their authority from, and it's where they fit in the hierarchy of the royals.
Right. Yeah, you can actually see the Habsburg jaw happening among a bunch of the royals today. Like one example is Queen Victoria of Sweden, who's recently been, I'm trying to think of the name for that, where she's almost the queen as soon as her mother passed away. But anyway, she's definitely got that Habsburg jaw. There's several others that I've noticed when I've been looking at pictures, and that's really interesting that they do that. Okay, because I would think that they'd want to keep their bloodline as pure as possible with the fallen angel DNA, the Nephilim DNA, but that makes sense that they have to incorporate some other bloodlines in there to keep them free of disease. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. I also want to say too, you're talking about Anna. That could either be male or female. That I believe there's an account in the book of Jasher mentioned about Anna, where this person was tending to the flocks in the field, and then they saw these very strange half donkey creatures that kind of freaked them out. And there's no other information of what happened after that, except he took off, and these half hybrid beings were eating the flocks. Do you remember that story, Gary?
I do. And, 2 Kings 17, I think, sheds a little bit of light on that as a possibility. You've got several gods that the Avim are worshiping in the settlement of Avim towards the Mesopotamian region versus the southern part of the land of the covenant. You have Nergal as a god that's worshipped, which is a lion-headed god, and the chief war god, like equivalent to Mars, for example, or Ares. And another one that's worshipped is Nebaz, who is depicted with a donkey's head or is it donkey's head? Yeah, it's donkey's head or a dog head, depending on how you want to describe that. But anyways, I might have that one mixed up off the top of my head, because there's a couple other gods that might have that relationship to the donkey in there, and the name is eluding me right now. But if you take that back to the Hebrew, that's where you get it. So and so if they created offspring, then they would produce hybrid beings just like them.
Yes.
So I think that has probably some sort of connection in there to what's being talked about in the book of Jasher on that.
Yeah, it's interesting how I'm just reading the book of Jasher for the first time, and all of a sudden I see these half donkey creatures eating. I'm like, where it just comes out of the blue. It just caught me off guard there. But it's a very interesting account. If anyone has not read the book of Jasher in Hebrew, I would highly recommend it. Although, of course, it's not part of the canon, but it has some good historical information there about the bloodlines of Esau, especially like all the information on his son Zepho, for example, the warrior that was taken captive by Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go into the first question that came in today in today's chat. This is from David Polazik. Are you ready for this, Gary?
Yep.
Okay. He's asking, and this is like 2 questions in one. What is Mithraism? That's the first part. And then the second part is kind of a separate topic. What would you tell a young follower of Islam to point them to Jesus? So you can answer the Mithraism, whichever you want to first.
Okay, so I just quickly looked up that other one. It's Tartak.
Tartak.
Tartak, yes, and according to tradition, worshipped under the form of an ass.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Sorry, I didn't have that at the tip of my brain. Just wasn't coming up. So
no, you have a lot of things at the tip of your brain, Gary. I don't know how you remember all these entities. Okay. So first of all, what is Mithraism?
Yep. Yeah, it was one of the most common religions during the Roman period. And part of the religions that a lot of the rituals and imagery was folded into Christianity. So it was a major religion amongst the warrior class in the army, but probably the most dominant religion of the time of the early church. So Mithra is the god, is the main god out of Mithraism. And this is the god that comes from an older religion called Zoroastrianism. That was in both Persia and in India. And this would be the religion of the Indo-Aryans or the Indo-Europeans that are giants. And Mitra is, or Mitra, depending on how you want to pronounce that, is the Indo-Aryan word and Sanskrit word for this god. And in Zoroastrianism, he's understood as the great architect of the universe. And so Mithra is also the part of the name that goes into the god that the Templars worshipped, which is Baphomet, Baphometer, as you take that back as a compounded word, and it means Father Mithra.
Oh, wow.
And so this is the chief god, and Baphomet is thought to be Azazel, or at least a goat god, as he's being depicted. So one of the degraded seraphim for sure, and likely, Azazel. And so anything to do with Mithraism or Mithraism, as it's called, Mithraism, or Zoroastrianism, understand that this is the religion of the giants, and so and should not be utilized in any sort of way other than for understanding. So when we get a term that comes forward out of Mithra as the god, he's the one who is like Shiva, who comes at the end of the age at its destruction and is there for the renewal afterwards. So again, you get this relationship with Shiva and with Mithra and Azazel and Abaddon and Apollyon as you start mixing all of those together. So important that we understand the language, because the son of perdition, as we would understand the Antichrist, is going to be called in the occult, in the Eastern version, as the new Buddha or Lord Maitreya, Lord Mithra. And Mithra makes this covenant, a bond and an alliance in the Sanskrit version. And it's interesting that Antichrist will create a covenant in the last 7 years. So way too many relationships that are out there to ignore, but we want to understand it and just sort of compartmentalize that for context for what might be coming. Now, what was the second question?
The second question, David is asking, what would you tell a young follower of Islam to point them to Jesus?
Well, the first thing is I would encourage them to read the Qur'an without a hadith. And that I would secondly ask them to recognize and look and provide the passages, if they wanted it, that says that everything that's written in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, is accurate. And that nowhere in the Quran says it was corrupted. And that you have passages that tell you that Jesus is the word that came from God in the Quran. It tells you in 3 passages that he was resurrected to heaven. And I would tell him, not tell him, but to encourage them to interpret, if it is scripture, and you believe it is scripture, that if everything that was written in the Old Testament and the New Testament is accurate and true, as the Quran says over and over and over, then you should interpret the Quran through the Bible and not the Hadiths. And that if you're told about the Messiah, which you are, and you deny him, Jesus will deny you too.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's great information to know, because in your work, I noticed you include quotes from the Quran, at least in book 1, I remember. And
Yep.
that was the first time I'd ever been exposed to anything from the Quran. So just having that knowledge that nothing in the Quran, or nowhere in the Quran does it say anything about the Bible, not about the Bible being corrupted. That's great information to present to someone, because I think we're going to see in the end times this religion becoming quite a bit more prominent. What do you think, Gary?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to have a large role in the end time, but I think it's going to be Islam is going to be more influenced in that version through the Sufis and the mystical side. So it's going to be corrupted like Christianity by the Gnostics and Judaism by mystical Judaism like Essenism and Kabbalism and other groups. And so they have to bring everything back to the home religion. And we don't get scripture that they do, and we don't get the Quran that says that they do, unless the Islamic people would accept Jesus as their Messiah, or would accept the people of Judah to actually be permitted as to being able to do sacrifices on a wing or an overspreading of the temple. I don't see how you get there with that sacrificing that Antichrist delivers in the first 3.5 years. So Islam has to be folded in and subservient to the greater religion for it to happen.
Yes, no, I agree too. That's good information, Gary. I wanted to ask you too, speaking of the Baphomet, did you happen to take a look at, there was a recent video, I think a couple days ago, released on Donald Trump's Instagram page. It's an AI video. It was really strange. It had like AI depictions of Trump like floating in a pool, drinking mixed drinks with Elon Musk, all kinds of crazy stuff. But the first screen really caught my attention because it says Trump and Gaza, and it's on like a theater type looking building. And on this particular theater building, it's all AI, of course. And they even say, yes, this is an AI video put out by the Trump administration or something to that effect. And right above where it says Trump and Gaza on this particular theater, there's 2 depictions of a Baphomet head right above it. I mean, it's very subtle, of course. It looks kind of artistic, but you can clearly see if you zoom in on it, it's definitely a Baphomet head, and also a gigantic all-seeing eye that one of the Baphomet heads is on the pupil part of it. So I just think that that's really interesting that's what Baphomet means. It's the worship of Mithra, which is what you just gave such a great definition for that, Gary. And if you haven't seen that, I don't know if anyone else wants to check that out. It's kind of a minor thing, but I just happened to see a video about it, and I thought, oh wow, that's pretty interesting. I better take some screenshots so I can look further into this.
I've not seen it. I'm not aware of that, but that's frightening.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy looking. I mean, it's all like dark on the outside, and they made the video on like an AI looking TV, and then the video is on the screen of that particular TV in this video, and it's just these strange AI depictions. I'm not sure what their point was to put it out there, but we know they have to put what they're doing in plain sight. So very interesting to know. Did you have anything else on that, Gary, before I go to the next question?
Well, and I would not put Trump in there as an Antichrist. Maybe an Antichrist wannabe. Doesn't have to be. Hopefully, he corrects his course here and gets back to not only representing Christians well, but in everything and how he does it, and stop trying to bring about the end time faster than shorter.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. I think we're going to see quite a bit more AI. I mean, I've kind of gotten used to seeing AI depictions now. And I mean, you can kind of tell the difference between what's real and fake now, but with the high level of fallen angel technology, I think eventually it's going to be really difficult to tell the difference.
Yep.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, I'm not convinced we will at a certain point. So
yeah, be able to tell the difference, right? Like they have it in their means to make everything look so realistic, and then with even the Elon Musk making the statement that by a certain year all Americans will have or could have an AI robot serving in their home. That's just wow. That is trying to bring it on really quick to the days of Noah. Okay. Next question from Floria Christine. She is asking, do you know the name of the study that speaks of 7 heavens and that Christ came unrecognized as an infant and passed angel guards, Gary?
Well, the 7 heavens are talked about in non-biblical writings, typically polytheist writings. And it's not that 7 heavens, you couldn't get there scripturally, but by definition, we only have 3 heavens. And that is the dwelling where God lives. That is what's outside the firmament, and the firmament as the atmosphere as we understand it. And so the other heavens that tend to make up those 7 heavens and other accounts, and there's more than one polytheist account, so I'm not sure which one she's referring to, but it's a standard occult belief system. Those are the doors or the gates or the openings within either the firmament or outside the firmament where things like great hail and fire comes from. And so you can get to the 7 by counting those in the Old Testament as they're applied. But that would be still part of the 3. It's not a separate, it's connected into that. Now, some people will say, well, that's in a different dimension outside that physical part of the universe, whichever part it's in, but perhaps. But it would be like saying Hades would be another heaven, which, again, the polytheists believe it is. That's where their gods rule from. But clearly it's not classified as another heaven in the biblical 3 definitions for where heaven is.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I'm also aware of, there's a book called The Vision of Isaiah. Some call it The Apocalypse of Isaiah, where it does mention there. I think in that book, though, it's 9 heavens. The 2 being the 2 top ones being part of the throne room, but where Christ does descend. I'm not sure as an infant, but he does. That's how he does come into earth as an infant. Are you aware of that book, Gary?
I am, and again, you get some different versions around. Like even 3rd Enoch has many levels of heaven, right? As it describes it. So, but again, those are polytheist documents. So, and even with the heaven aspect of it in 3rd Enoch, they seem to be separating portions within the spirit realm where God lives. So, again, it seems to be, more of a perversion of how we would understand heaven. But who knows how many different levels there are in the upper heaven. But biblically, it's only classified as the 3 and only one dwelling place for the spirit beings.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Gary. Next one is from Donna Smith. She's asking, are you aware of the Willow quantum chip? I've never heard that myself. The Willow quantum chip?
No, I haven't. But we're going to see a whole bunch of technology that's going to be coming because quantum has suddenly upgraded significantly in its capabilities. And then particularly as they're trying to develop AI to merge into that. So quantum technology is one of the big requirements, along with AI, to be able to have technology that can work in multiple dimensions. And so they need to be able to get into that dimension that is where the divine essence is, or the Atma, or the Brahman, or the source, or the gods live, and get access to that information to create the promises, the platform for the promises that they're going to ask for, or have you swear an oath to, I guess is a better way of doing it, which is going to be immortality, so that they can rebuild everything over and over and over of you from the quantum level, or supply new Oikatarians for our dwelling place for the spirit, and unlimited knowledge. And so they have to have that level of quantum and AI that we're struggling now and to understand, but starting to get a picture of what that's going to look like, and that's going to be part of that chip system that gives that interconnection. So not sure what the willow is, but willow is an important occult tree. But they do like to name everything after their history, their genealogy, and their religion. So that's not surprising they would use the term willow.
Ah, very interesting. Yeah, Donna's in the chat. She's saying, please research this. So Donna, yes, I want to take a look and see what you're talking about. It sounds very interesting. And like Gary said, of course, we're looking out for a variety of different chips that these people are going to come out with. Or I should say these entities are going to come out with. There's another question in here from Russell Eads, Gary. He's asking you to please elaborate more on the Genesis passage, let us make man in our image, spiritually and or physically, if you could, please. Brother Gary, I'll repeat the question is, Russell would like you to elaborate more on let us make man in our image, either spiritually, physically, or both from the Genesis 1 passage.
Yes. I have to have my mic on if I'm going to speak.
Oh.
I need to remember that.
That's okay. I do the same thing. That's fine.
Yeah. So it's people want to know who is us in that passage, right? I think that's probably where the direction of the question is going to be. And when I look at that, I don't see an issue in terms of the wording on it. But what I will say is the word "lets us" is inserted by translators. So we want to be careful with that. So, and it says, God said in Hebrew, Elohim Amar, and then make man in English, in our is inserted image. So the translators are trying to make that. So I don't have a problem with translation, but we don't have a Hebrew word there that would definitely say that would be angels that are doing it, as in the plural for let us. But that's typically what people will say for Genesis 1 as they're trying to match that up with polytheist accounts, that it's the angels that created humans. So that's Elohim Amar. And so Amar is the word of God. Elohim in this case is as God in the singular sense in the upper case. Could also be El Elyon. But because all three are there in this process, then we should understand that this is including not only God, but all of the Elohim working together. Now we have the Ruach of God in Genesis 1:2, so we know the Spirit is there as well. And in the word said, we know the word shows up there. And what's also interesting is you go back into earlier on, there's a very interesting passage in terms of the order of the creation. And it happens in Genesis 1:4, where it says, and God saw the light. And the light is good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and he called that day 1. Well, guess what? The sun for the measurement of the day doesn't happen until day 4. So right. Who is the light? That is the word Jesus. And how do we know that? If you read John 1 and John 8, Jesus tells you he is the light.
Yeah.
And he's referring back to creation as well in the accounts. So if you read all of that in context, that's where we know for sure that Jesus is there, and as creating all things, as John 1 and Colossians 1 talks about, as Jesus, the word creating all things, when God commands it and speaks, that's the word, that's Jesus in the action, but we know he's there in the world with the light, just as the Spirit is there, which are the two requirements for life on earth.
Oh, that's awesome, Gary. Also, there's a book. I'm not sure if I told you the last time, Gary, but I was part of a team who authored a book while we were in the Philippines called The Mystery of the Three Kings. And it's actually it's available on Amazon. It's with a ministry called the God Culture, who's based in the Philippines. And we were reviewing a book that was recently released from the Vatican in, I believe, 2012, called Revelation of the Magi. And in this particular book, it's narrated by the Magi themselves. And they talk about how Christ was the star that they followed from the Far East all the way to Jerusalem and then Bethlehem. And that during their journey, Christ was speaking with them, and he was explaining to them how he was the original light of the world and the light that would light up the garden. And he was positioned at the top of the tree of life. I just think that's so interesting how that incorporates into that language about him being the light of the world, and that he was the original light. And we can see that in John 1, just like you pointed out.
Yes, he's the morning star. And
Yes.
people who are trying to look for signs of God using the physical world dynamics and laws, that's not how God does the signs. God does signs to show us he's God, and he's above and greater than everything he had created through the word of God. And he does things that are physically impossible in the universe, like having that star for Bethlehem. That is beyond all the laws. And so seculars and polytheists try and wedge issues into our faith that, well, we can't really get a star lined up in that date and all sorts of other things, and there's no way that would be possible. They're not understanding it correctly. It's kind of like in the 3 days of darkness in the Exodus. Not possible.
Right.
Not possible unless it's done by the God Most High, who is above the laws of creation. Joshua, in the time of the conquest, where the sun stands still and he has enough light to finish the battle, that is not possible. So
Yes.
signs that God provide is something that is preternatural, absolutely so preternatural it's completely outside anything in the physical universe and anything that any of the spirit beings like the fallen angels or any other angel could do. They can't do it.
Yes. And in this book, Revelation of the Magi, it explains how this the star that we're talking about, which was Christ, was only visible to the Magi, to the angels. I mean, the angels were only visible to the shepherds, and this particular star was so bright that it was described as lighting up the entire sky under the firmament to the people that were given the eyes to see it. Now, we don't have any evidence of Herod actually being able to see this star that the Magi followed, and because he was asking them about it, and if it lit up the entire sky, everyone in the entire world would be able to see it. So it's kind of amazing, like what you just said, that these divine signs that the Most High gives are beyond anything that we could imagine, and that is so true of what was present with the star at the time of the appearing of at the time the Magi saw it. So,
and
yes.
so important for Christians to understand that signs that we want to look for from God in the end time will be signs like that, not things that with great technology and things that are still part of the laws of the physics of this universe that the fallen angels can provide for the adversarial forces that are trying to deceive us to walk away from God.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Gary. That brings us to a great close of this Ask Me Anything. We hope all of you will join us again next month, the first Wednesday of the month of April. And we'll take the questions from the chat and submit them so Gary can be prepared for next time. Thank you, Brother Gary, again for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you, everyone in the chat and moderators. You guys all be blessed. And we'll see you this weekend for Digital Readers Club. Shalom.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
Become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
When Justin and I found out we were having a little girl, we named her Eliana and started dreaming of what life would be like with her, where we would take her, what we would teach her, and of course, what we would read to her. One day we walked around a bookstore looking for books we might want for her and found nothing, so we started brainstorming what exactly we would want. Even from a young age, we wanted her to know and understand the heart of God, and hidden truths that are in ancient biblical manuscripts like the Book of Enoch, and the idea of the Prophecy for Children series was born. Justin got hard to work and praise Yah released the Prophecy for Children series. We are grateful for the support and amazing feedback from others who have been wanting the same for their children. With our newest addition to the family, Ezra, we also added Enoch's judgment of the giants to this prophecy series. We're excited to keep writing books for our children to share with our truth-seeking family. To order these books today, please check out sacredwordpublishing.com/collections/children's-store.